Hello. Today I wanted to take a look at an unsung strategy article by Terry Hill and Roy Westbrook called SWOT Analysis, It's Time for a Product Recall. It appeared in Long Range Planning in 1997. I wanted to look at this article as it articulates some of the real concerns strategy theorists have with SWOT as an analytical tool. Indeed, many of the key strategy articles that we have covered in these videos have as their origins a dissatisfaction with SWOT, including Porter and also the RBV theorists such as Barney and Prahalad and Hamill. In a team that is willing to openly challenge each other, SWOT can be a facilitation device, but the message here is don't use it as an analysis tool, and certainly don't pay consultants to use it, or let anyone tell you, it'll be okay, we'll just do a quick SWOT. Hill and Westbrook start the article by describing the research they carried out on 20 small to medium-sized UK firms who have undertaken SWOT analysis as part of a government-funded scheme in the 1990s to stimulate innovation. They also briefly describe the origins of SWOT and highlight some vocal critics. The work of Kenneth Andrews 60 years ago in the 1960s in the development of what became known as the design school of strategy popularised the idea that good strategy meant finding fit between the external situation of the firm, the threats and opportunities, and its own qualities and characteristics, strengths and weaknesses. While there have been many subsequent approaches to strategy formulation that promote different thinking, many modern textbooks still feel obliged to include this, and many managers automatically reach for it when strategy is mentioned. However, there are many reservations. Mintzberg is highly dismissive as part of his critique of planning approaches to strategy. The approach fails to take on board how humans really think and behave. Here it's worth seeing another article in this series, Why Good Companies Go Bad by Donald Sull. However, proponents of SWOT still persevere and prescribe SWOT as a rigorous analysis tool, whether it's entitled SWOT or more recently TOWS. Given this debate, Hill and Westbrook's opportunity to empirically study SWOT usage was valuable. Their study looked at issues from three perspectives: the process, the content of SWOTs, and subsequent usage of the output. Now, in process, they saw three approaches. Firstly, an individual company manager or an external consultant, after discussions with senior managers, carries out the SWOT. Alternatively, several senior managers undertake individual SWOTs which are then collated. Sometimes this is followed by a meeting to agree a communal SWOT. And finally, the SWOT is the output from a meeting or meetings of managers who all contribute, probably facilitated by a consultant or a company employee. The authors note several points about the process they saw in their research. Firstly, the terms used to describe factors were highly generic and often vague, things like value for money or performance. Secondly, no analysis or verification of any point was ever undertaken. Thirdly, all points were universal, but assumed to apply equally to all products, functions and markets addressed by the firm. And fourthly, often after lists were produced, the consultant made their own list, which differed substantially from those the company personnel had produced. but there was no on-the-site work done by the consultant. No explanation was given for the differences. In terms of the content, generally long lists were produced, an average of 10 factors per category, with a range of total number of factors being anything between 11 and 216. At the upper end, it reflected the number of people who contributed to the list. On average, more weaknesses were identified than strengths, and slightly more opportunities than threats. Now, making lists is important to the process, but should only be the first step. But in all but one case in their study, the lists were not prioritised, grouped, weighted or sequenced in any way. In terms of individual factors, they were comprised of extremely brief expressions, often only 3 or 4 word phrases, usually very general statements like high stocks or long lead times, not innovative enough or poor quality. Few had any numerical data attached to support the point. Related to this sketchiness, the authors had 3 other main findings. Firstly, consultants or managers rarely challenged or sought clarification on points raised. They merely recorded. So there was no independent verification being carried out of any of the SWOT issues. Where the same point was recorded under 2 or more categories, perhaps both a strength and weakness, no reconciliation was then made to resolve this contradiction. Also, the distinction between internal and external categories were not always preserved, and general points remain general with no process to increase precision. In terms of the subsequent use of the output, in only 3 cases did the findings feed any decision or action plan. In the rest, no use was made by the company or the consultants involved. In one company, a record of the SWOT could not even be found. Hill and Westbrook conclude their article with the following comments. The SWOT, as displayed in the companies studied, was ineffective as a means of analysis. Indeed, it is debatable if you could count the SWOT as analysis at all. The most positive outcomes that could be ascribed to their use was to raise debate and familiarise those involved, perhaps the consultants, with issues in the firm. This may have been valuable if the process had been followed up and investigated further. But despite this, time was still invested and high consultant fees paid. So was this a function of the quality of the people involved or intrinsic in the SWOT analysis? While the authors suggest a whole range of capability were involved in these processes, and so feel there is concern that should be raised over the SWOT approach itself. Remember, it was designed in a more stable era, and perhaps it is unsuited for the more complex and dynamic times in which greater attention is needed to specific causes and effects, and where prevailing views need to be challenged within a firm or an industry. Hill and Westbrook sum up the article by expressing their intrinsic concerns about the SWOT analysis. It's all about just making long lists with no analysis. It's unclear and ambiguous in the way points are expressed. There's no resolution of conflicts between issues. There's no obligation to verify statements and opinions. And there's only a single level of analysis required, with no logical link being made to actions that need to be taken. They finish with a criticism of academics that lead to the SWOT still being used so extensively. That is, that academics never do product recalls. Ideas and approaches that were useful once may continue to influence long after they have served their purpose. Outmoded ideas, therefore, may hold unmerited positions in the thinking used in education, management, and in consulting that leads to poor results and practice of strategy. And it may also inhibit the take-up of better approaches. So it may be time to relinquish our fondness of SWOT, which seems now to have passed its sell-by date. So a strong opinion by these authors, but what do we make of their views? Well, certainly it matches the experience of many who have used SWOT. It also matches the motivation of theorists such as Porter and Barney, who developed their frameworks starting from the premise that SWOT does not provide the necessary insight that allows good strategy making. Yet, there is still a tendency in strategic management to keep returning to it as an underlying structure. Perhaps position Porter's work as how you explore opportunities and threats, and RBV to assess strengths and weaknesses. But, as we've seen in the summaries of key strategy articles, the thinking of these theorists go far deeper, and so this shallow attempt at producing some grand theory of everything in strategy is flawed. Different theories are based on fundamentally different assumptions, and it is flawed to try to superficially fuse them together into some Frankenstein model. In doing so, you lose the richness of the insight you may gain from each. Instead, look to synthesize the insight in decision making, not in the use of the tools in analysis. So maybe, after 60 years, in today's world, it really is time to let SWOT go and move on to do a product recall. Interestingly, this is something Porter seems to be doing with his generic strategies. But with cost leadership and differentiation still default in many managers' and students' minds, it is questionable if this can be done. However, next time you have a consultant doing a SWOT, or a student or a lecturer say, just do a quick SWOT, do challenge them, the output, and how it is added to your strategic thinking. Get them to look at the 60 years of strategic theory that has been developed since, and use something that is more rigorous.